for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it, seeing all these fresh faces and familiar faces. So as I was preparing for this evening, I watched several TED Talks. That probably wasn't a smart thing to do because then I realized what I was up against. But what it did do for me is it got me connected to a speaker that really resonated with me. And the speaker was talking about the power we have to change the world through ideas. And I began to think about that. And she went on to say that, you know, ideas are powerful, they take us to new heights. And I was thinking about the sharing of those ideas and how the sharing of ideas demands us to have connection with others. I believe we can change the world through connections. When I think about the meaning of the word connect, it gets personal. It means we need to create a relationship somehow with someone. Now, that can be easier for some of us than others, depending on our personality. If we're maybe a little more outgoing, maybe we're quieter. But for all of us, that propels us into uncomfortable territory. It demands vulnerability for us to take risk and to establish trust. And that can be quite daunting for all of us. In my role as a social worker and professor, I have interactions and connections all the time. When I think about the difference between an interaction and a connection, I see a very distinct difference. An interaction is an exchange with something or someone. Now let me give you an example. I go through the McDonald's drive-thru and I get my large Diet Coke with extra ice and I have an interaction. I purchase a pair of boots at Von Maur in the shoe department and that's an interaction. I open the door for you, you open the door for me, that's an interaction. We've exchanged. But we may not have made a connection because that, again, demands a relationship that we need to have. And when we create relationships, we're again going into the unknown areas. We're in uncomfortable territory. We're wondering if someone's going to accept us or reject us. And that's, again, quite daunting and quite unnerving. So those of you that know me know that I thrive on connection. I want to spend 99% of my time with people and about 1% not. So whether I'm with students in the classroom or out in the community, if I am with my social work colleagues and I'm doing consulting, I'm working with them, I'm working with clients, whether I'm at the Good Samaritan Inn volunteering, I'm at Oasis providing manicures, or I'm social working here at the library. Each and every one of those connections has significant meaning to me. And I am a better human being because of those connections. So I want to tell you a story for the next few moments about a connection that I had in my life that propelled my career as a social worker and a professor. This connection is as real to me tonight as it was in 1995. So picture this, I'm 27. I thought I'd offer you some photos so you could picture that actually. Think about the 27-year-old Mary, not the 22-year-old Mary. And I am on my way to an interview. So my son and I had moved to a new community. I'd been applying for jobs, and I came across a job called a day treatment specialist. And let me digress a moment and say that as we applied for jobs back in the day, it was through the newspaper. So there was a small ad, and it was about 5 lines long, and it said day treatment specialist. And then it said, send your resume and cover letter to, and it listed the agency and the address. That's it. Didn't say what the job was, didn't talk about any skills I needed, any credentials that I needed. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to apply, because I can be a specialist of day treatment, right? I knew I could do that. So I could craft a cover letter and a resume that was going to be competitive, and I was going to score an interview. And I did. So now I'm on my way to an interview. The interview is at 1 o'clock. So I was told that when I get there, just to kind of come into this house. So it was a facility that was a part of the agency that ran a program. So it was just a residential area. So I drove up in front of this blue 2-story home. As I got out of my car, I eased up the steps, and on my right, kind of on the porch, there was kind of a gentleman in his mid-40s, bearded, sitting in an old white porch chair, smoking, and looking what I thought was kind of at me. So as I do to everybody, I say, hello. And he didn't say anything. So I thought, okay, that's all right. I say hello to a lot of people and don't get a response, so I was just going to not intrude. So I proceeded to go to the door, and as I went to open the door, all of a sudden, this low, rough, but quite loud voice said, "Hey, who are you and what are you doing here?" Oh, okay. I was a bit startled, and I stepped back. I wasn't scared, but I thought that this gentleman had no idea that I was there. So now I'm like, oh, okay, he knows I'm here. So I turned and I said, "Oh, hi." I said, "My name's Mary, and I'm here for an interview." He's looking still straight ahead, not at me. No response. I have still some moments. I had arrived about 15 minutes early, so now I'm probably about, 13 minutes left. And I thought, I'm going to wait just a minute here, because he didn't respond as quickly when I said hello, but then he did say something, so I thought maybe there's something else. So I tried to look the other way, and nothing's happening, so I thought, I'm just going to go inside. I reached for the door, and all of a sudden, the gentleman bellows out, "Come here! Come here!" And I turn, and he is waving his arm, and he's tapping on the arm of the chair. "Come here!" Okay, so again, he was on my right, so I wanted to turn to have him on my left, and I also knelt down to be next to him, because I would have been towering over him. So I knelt down, and he is looking ahead, and he is pointing, "Do you see it? Do you see it?" And he's just yelling. And I am looking, not seeing what I think he's seeing. I see trees across the street. I see a house across the street. But clearly, I'm not seeing what he's seeing. But I didn't want to tell him that. So I said, "Tell me what you're seeing." So he continued to kneel down, and he begins to describe what I will now refer to as the eye. He takes his hands in his arms, and he's sitting down, and he says, "There's this huge eye, and it's following me," and he's talking all about how it's tracking him, and it's telling him he's telling other people what he's doing on the porch, and he's very, very animated. And I'm listening, and I'm watching, and I'm looking for the eye, and I can't see it. And then all of a sudden, it hits me. I see a birch tree, and I see an eye of the birch tree. That's it. That's what he sees. So now I see that. He continues to talk about it, and as he's talking and I'm still kneeling, he stops. And as he stops, I begin to think, I remember something from my childhood. So I was born in Michigan and grew up in Birmingham for the first 8 years of my life. When I was 6 years old, I shared a room with my sister in a 2-story house. And we had a birch tree outside of our window. And that birch tree had a huge eye. And I remember being scared of that eye. What was different for me is that eye, I didn't believe that it tracked me, that it told people what I was doing. At 6, it was just scary and creepy. And I remember telling my parents that. It was fate. Here I am on the porch with this gentleman who sees an eye in a birch tree. I had my experience with an eye in a birch tree. We had made a connection. So I continued to stay present and by him. And I began to get nervous because I have an interview to go to. It's close. I look at my watch, yep, I got about 30 seconds. I didn't want to lose this connection, though. I didn't quite know how he was going to do this. So he's continuing to look forward. And I turned to him and I said, thank you for sharing with me what you're seeing. I said, I need to go to my interview, but if you're here when I get back, I'd love to talk to you more. He looks ahead and says, okay, great, good luck. We get this huge connection. So I go ahead and I go in, and I go up to meet Lisa, who's going to interview me. And we sit down and share pleasantries, and she says to me, I saw you downstairs on the porch with Mike. I now learned his name. He had asked me mine when he said, who are you and what are you doing here? I didn't ask him his because I knew that that wasn't the right time. I didn't want him intrude. But now I knew his name. I had connected with Mike. She said, you didn't seem uncomfortable at all, and you seemed really at ease. And you know what, I was quite comfortable. I had never had a connection like that. So she shared a little bit more about what she saw with the interaction, connection on the porch. And after that she said, I'd like to offer you the job of day treatment specialist. And I accepted it. Now let's remember, I don't know what the job is, right? There was nothing in the paper about the job, but I knew that I wanted that job. I knew that I wanted to have more connections with Mike and individuals who I assumed would come to that home that would be like Mike and I could connect. I had found my passion. So we joked a bit after that, because she said, well, I should probably tell you about the job. And so she rattled off some things, and she said, you know, you'll get some Friday afternoons off, but you have to work a couple Saturdays. And you know, I think if she would have told me I had to work swing shift, midnight to 6, I'd been like, yep, okay, I'll take the job. It really didn't matter to me, because I knew that I wanted that job. I left the interview and I went back on the front porch, and Mike was still there. I was very, very excited. He was looking ahead what I presumed to be the eye. And he said, how'd it go? And I said, it went really well. I got the job. So I'm facing him, he's looking ahead. He turns to me and he focuses on me and he says, well, that's good. I'm going to be your client. I was thrilled. The connection that Mike and I made that day changed my life. Within a year, I had enrolled in a Master of Social Work program at the University of Illinois. I finished my degree. A couple years later, I ended up getting my license as a clinical social worker. I started off getting a job that day that propelled me to a career because of the connection I had with Mike and I would work together for over the next 15 years in various programs within the community that I was responsible for. Our connection only grew, and we continued to have a bond. And he would share with me different things. We talked a lot about the eye, and I eventually shared with him my story about the eye from the birch tree when I was 6. I talked about what my reality was that was very different than his reality. Mike also shared other things that tormented him. He shared that when he walks into rooms and there's fluorescent lights and the drop ceilings, that he believed that little people were running around and that they were tracking him. And so you could see his whole demeanor change when he would walk into a room, a Walmart or a Kroger. He was frightened by that. He would also talk about being shot. This would come up several times a month. And I would come to the group home where he was, and I'd come up on the porch, and he'd be in a chair smoking, and he'd say, hey, 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 Mary, look, look. And he would pull his shirt a bit, and he would show me and touch what he felt and saw as a gunshot wound. I saw nothing. He was tormented Mike lived with severe symptoms of mental illness and psychosis. And I believe that our connection allowed him to share with me. I believe that our connection and my role was to help support, guide, and honor him as he lived with his illness. Mike's and my connection changed both of our lives. I appreciate you very much coming out tonight. I'm going to ask that as you think about your connections with other individuals, that you are deliberate about that and you see the meaning in them. Change the world. Our lives and world could be better if we would only connect. Thank you.